We're on. All right. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning from wherever you're joining us from today. I'm Fabio Braga. I'm a chief architect at Microsoft, and welcome to another Reactor Sydney live stream event. Today, help me facilitate this event. We have my colleagues Shiva Ford and Sarah Oro. Thank you very much, girls. And I would like to begin by paying my respect to the Gadigal people, the traditional custodians of this land where we're meeting upon today. Right. So with remote work on the rise, data breaches have become increasingly common and are more sophisticated than ever, right? So organizations, individuals from around the world have been exposed to breaches, and each one of these offer an opportunity to learn and how we could protect the world against cyber threats. And today, joining me to discuss this topic is Troy Hunt. Thank you, Troy. Troy is an InfoSec expert, founder of the Have I Been Pwned website, the most famous website there. Troy has been building web applications in the finance, media, and healthcare industries since the early days of web in the mid-90s. So you're based in Sydney, is that right, Troy?
Nope. No, it's not off to a good start. No, I'm on the Gold Coast.
In the Goldie. But you're still working as an architect for Pfizer Pharmaceuticals?
Nope. No, that's about 6 years out of date. All right, you're 0 from 2, Fabio. Let's see if we can go for 3, mate.
Sarah, you're in trouble, Sarah.
What have I done? Sorry, what did I do?
The script you gave me needs updating.
Sorry, Troy. Blame Microsoft.
I think people know who I am. We should
our
just skip the
employee
bio.
website.
Don't worry about it.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. That's all right. So look, so this session is going to be approximately 60 minutes with about 10-15 minutes of those questions. So I'm going to ask you, please, when you join, to mute yourself. When you have to join the car.
If only we'd all had lots of practice at doing teleconferences lately and we knew how to get on top of this stuff.
Look, so we're going to have questions. So along the session, please send us on the Q&A session. Shiva and Sarah will help me to facilitate and answer questions as we go through. And at the conclusion of this session, I'm going to share with the links for the feedback of the survey for the session. Also a link to the YouTube channel where the recording of this meeting will be available. Right. So for now, let's begin. So Troy, thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate that. And apologies for the mistakes on where you're based now. You keep moving apparently.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It was all correct once upon a time.
That's right. That's right. It's all a point in time. So look, I would like to have this chat with you today and approach this topic of data breaches from 3 different angles, right? So whenever we have a data breach, we have some actors involved, and we have the individuals whose data have been leaked, and they usually the ones who suffer most of the consequences of that data leak. We also have the organizations that got their data leaked from, right? And seeing all of that to unfold, we have authorities and regulatory bodies. So I'd like to split our session today, our conversation, talking about each one of these actors and have your view in some of these aspects. Is that okay if we do that?
Yeah, man, go for it.
Awesome. From an individual's perspective, right? So Have You Been Pwned is an amazing awareness tool, right? Which gives individuals to find out, the means to find out if their data has been leaked out there, right? In one of those data breaches, right? But many people still don't realize the destructive power of a data leak, right? Can you tell us some of your experiences from the past of data that has been leaked, that have been used against their legitimate owners, and what kind of damage they caused?
You know, it's and as you know, but for everyone else's sake as well, often people send me questions in advance. I'm like, no, don't send me questions. Let's just make it organic and interesting. And you sent me some, and I said, I'm not going to read them. I had noticed that one, and I was going to go, as I'll talk about Ashley Madison, but I just thought about something which I think was actually, in many ways, much scarier and perhaps much more relatable, which is there's a Finnish psychotherapy service that was breached. I think it was late last year. and they got ransomware. And what we've seen happening with ransomware is it's gone from just an attack on availability where it would encrypt things and you didn't have access to them, unless, of course, you paid for the key. But it's also leading to attack on confidentiality, where the information is being taken by the attackers offline as well. And this is kind of interesting because before it was like just run something on the device and then everything gets encrypted and then you need a key. But now it's like, give me a copy, take it all off the device and do this. So anyway, what happened to the Finnish psychotherapy one is not only did the organization get ransomed, but the individuals within the breach got ransomed. And I shared something on Twitter the other day with a story about a sort of first-hand experience of a guy who received one of these ransom messages, and his psychotherapy notes are part of the ransom. It's like, here's something very, very deep and personal that you've shared with a healthcare professionalist helping you with mental health issues, and now someone is saying, give me Bitcoin, or I'm going to dump this publicly. So I think that is a fascinating example of just how impactful a data breach can be on individuals, because these, of course, are also at-risk individuals very often if they've been getting psychotherapy. So might that then lead to actually Madison-style incidents, which is, again, is what I was originally thinking, where some people literally killed themselves as a result of the stress caused by the incident?
Wow, that's a very interesting story. I can only imagine, for example, the potential damage of on those people, for example, that start actually, and then that leads to other social problems like cyberbullying and everything. Once that information is out there, it's one problem leads to another, right? And I'm sure that you have already covered this topic millions of times, right, as part of your work. But once someone finds out that their data have been leaked, right? So what are the let's say the measures that I should take from there to prevent that damage from being kind of exponential, or at least try to mitigate the damage of that leak?
So it's really, yeah. Look, it's really dependent on the nature of the data. So very often, if we look at like what's the most common scenario, very often it's your email address and your password. So what does that mean? Well, because most people are normal humans and they've reused their passwords all over the place, the potential damage there is that someone's going to start getting into your other accounts. And this happens all the time. We call it credential stuffing, where we get usernames and passwords from one service and then people use them to break into other services. So obviously in a case like that, you go and change your passwords, and also you hopefully stop using the same password everywhere. Go and get a password manager and do it right and stop worrying. But what happens if it's something else that's, I'll give you a good example. Australian Red Cross Blood Service. So they got breached in 2015, and my data was in there. Now, one of the classes of data that was leaked is blood type. Oh, well, I can't change that, like what do I do? But by the same token, do I care? And I do think we need to be maybe just a little bit more pragmatic with data breaches as well. And so, look, I don't like it happening. I mean, have I been pwned 25 times? Like, I don't like being there. No one wants to get an email from me, including me. But what do I do about something like blood type? Well, frankly, I don't do anything. What do I do? There's one I'm loading at the moment, which has got VIN numbers, vehicle identification numbers. What do you do about VIN numbers? Well, you can't change that either, but does it actually really matter? I think a lot of it comes down to awareness. So something, actually, as soon as I said that, I realized it matters. It matters because I have something else I disclosed some years ago was using VIN numbers on a Nissan mobile app service that was literally running on your phone to control features of the car. I mean, there's all sorts of problems with that, including the fact that your VIN number is very often printed in the windscreen of the car and faces publicly. But like, what do you do about that? Probably nothing. But I think a lot of this, let's just say, take something else, like say phone number and physical address. You're really not going to change either of those because of an incident like this. What should you do? Identity theft monitoring, that's a pretty common thing. Being conscious of scams. A lot of this is just like, look, it's heightened awareness as opposed to something that you now need to go and start doing differently to what you did yesterday.
That's awesome. That's some very, very important tips there once you find out. I like the spin that you gave in terms of, okay, what's the potential damage of that specific data point that was leaked, right? As you mentioned, blood type. What can you do with your blood type in terms of trying to compromise your identity or trying to cause any kind of damage? right? So it really depends on what kind of data was leaked, right?
It does, and then it's different for different people too. I mean, let's say it's sexuality. If my sexuality gets leaked, I don't care because it's a pretty easy guess because I've posted photos of my fiance. But if someone else's gets leaked, that might be something that is very personal to them. And it's the same with gender, and it's the same with religion and politics. And this is why we have things like sensitive PII, classes of data, which do deserve a higher degree of privacy than others. So it can be a very personal thing as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's awesome. And finally, here from the individual's perspective, right? So I think you've given us some clues of what the answer is, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. So what can we do as preventive steps to mitigate the damage, right? So you mentioned, for example, using password manager as being one of them as a way to not to reuse passwords across multiple websites. What else can individuals use on a daily basis and be proactive in terms of the not being damaged by data leaks?
So here's a really good practical thing that I think us as individuals and organizations can do better, which is to practice this principle of data minimization. So how do we provide as individuals or collect as organizations only the information which is sufficient to perform the task for which it's being provided for? So I'll give you an example. If you register, there's a true story, if you register on catforum.com, it will ask you for your date of birth. Now you can give catforum.com your date of birth, and I don't know, like maybe you get a picture of a kitten or something on your birthday. that's the only practical reason, and even that's not a very good one, for entering your date of birth. So how about not provide that? How about don't give them that information when you register, because it comes back to this old principle of you cannot lose what you do not have. So if I don't provide that information to someone, then they can't lose it. And I know that it's meant to be the personal bit, not the organisation bit, but I'd love from the organisation perspective for someone, a service like catforum.com to say, you know what, we don't actually need this data. We don't need to collect it. And then the fun thing is every time I make a comment like that online, someone will say, well, you've got to ask the date of birth because of COPPA, the Child Online Protection Act in the US. And, you know, you've got to be 13 to use a lot of these services. And then I'll say to people, it's like, well, why not? Why not? Instead of actually asking for the date of birth, and this comes back to minimization again, why don't you just ask the person, are you 13? And if you're 13, you get to register, and if you're not, you don't. Because that meets the requirement of the request for the personal data in the first place, but it doesn't create the risk. And then I kid you not, every time I do this, every time I put it out there, and every time I say, why don't you just, ask them how old they are, someone always pops up and says, you can't do that because people could lie. You got to ask them for their birthday. And I'm just going, oh my God, I've got a long, prosperous career ahead of me with people like this in the world.
That's right. That's right. No, but that's a very good point, which is a good segue now to my next topic. Because if we shift away the focus from the individual and now start thinking about organizations that are on the other end of a data leak, right? Organizations who got their data leaked. You've just mentioned, for example, one behavior that organizations they ask for data points that may not need to be honest, right? So if they were to follow these principles, they would be reducing their exposure to a data leak and potential reputational damage as an outcome, as a result of that, right? So let's have a look at that for example, and see, depending on how extensive and how sensitive the data leak, it has the potential to cause some serious damage, not only to the individuals, but also to the organizations, right? So now we have some hefty fines in place, and you have some punishment to some people who are accountable for keeping data secure. So can you share some of the stories, for example, where data got leaked from organizations, and these organizations actually they suffer the consequences of that data leak somehow?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people would argue that the penalties that we have for organisations really just aren't severe enough, and there's not enough incentive for organisations to invest in security because there's not enough de-incentivization of having breaches. And if we pick some examples, I mean, organisations particularly if we pick places outside Australia. Australia isn't very good at at pinging organisations for data breaches. But something like TalkTalk in the UK, I mean, TalkTalk had a massive data breach in 2015. They got fined £400,000. And you might look at it and go, oh, £400,000 feels like quite a bit of money. Yeah, well, they earn 1.8 billion a year. So I remember doing the maths at the time, and it was like, that's like if you earn $100,000 a year and someone says, I'm going to take your lunch money away, because it was literally like $20 or something like that. So very often it sort of lacks the teeth. Now, having said that as well, there are many costs for an organisation beyond what regulators impose in terms of penalty. I mean, TalkTalk said it cost them £72 million, not from the Information Commissioner's Office. That was only the 400,000, but £72 million to mop up the mess afterwards. And an organisation like Equifax is a good example of that. The amount of money that has to go into recovering from an incident like that. So I think it's a very difficult thing to put a clear answer around in terms of things like penalties. Again, Australia is very light. When we look at things like GDPR in Europe, well, it's that has the potential to have real teeth, up to 4% of growth annual worldwide turnover, which is a lot more than £400,000 for a company like TalkTalk. But is it actually changing anything? We've had GDPR for a few years now. Is it actually changing anything? I've got more data breaches than ever to deal with. I know that much.
That's a very interesting point. So look, from this regulation perspective, for organization, that's another topic that we're going to talk about, right? The other pillar from the authorities and the regulatory bodies. Would you say that we definitely made some improvements, right, with with legislation like GDPR, for example, right? So what's your view on the progress that we've made so far with this legislation, and what else is still further down the road for us to have the ability to control?
I think it depends on how you define we, like as Australians or as citizens of the world.
As society out there, yeah.
Let me answer my own question. I think as Australians, we haven't done a particularly great job of it. If we look at something like our notifiable data breach scheme, which was our first sort of mandatory disclosure laws, and compare that to Europe, it's stuff like, in Europe, under GDPR, you got 72 hours to report a data breach to the local regulator, not necessarily to report it publicly or to your customers, but to your local regulator. Australia, we're just going, a month seems fair. We'll make it a month. So it's literally 10 times longer. And then we go, we don't want to make it too hard on companies. So you gotta have at least a few million a year worth of turnover in order to actually have to disclose. So okay, well, that's more than 90% of businesses ruled out. And then you can self-assess and decide whether it's likely to cause serious harm to the individual or not. So that's a large chunk of the remaining ones ruled out. And I think the thing that I lament out of all of this is that my view of it is that data breaches happen to organizations because every single time they screwed something up, every single time they made a mistake somewhere. And now that mistake might have been performed by another organization. So perhaps someone else manages their infrastructure and they put a database back up publicly facing, but there's still someone somewhere every single time that makes a mistake. And the individuals such as me and you and probably everyone else listening to this has been a data breach before, we are the innocent victims of this. And frankly, our rights should come first in terms of notification and support to recover whatever that may mean, depending on the nature of the breach. And I just fundamentally disagree with the way it's structured in Australia. I think the other thing out of this, which is all very interesting, is, okay, Australia's a different country. We make our own laws compared to the EU. They can do what they want, and then California can do their CCPA stuff, and everywhere in the world can do their own thing. And laws work fine when you're there. It's like if you're in America and you speed, you get a speeding ticket for whatever the rules are in America, and it's different if you're here. It's different each state here. But then when you get online, like you're physically in these different parts of the world, but everybody gets online into the same community. But everyone's sort of playing by different rules in the same community. And I think it makes things very messy in data breach land.
That's right. That is right. It's funny how different countries, different rules. It's gonna be hard to get a kind of a standard and move everyone at the same pace when the topic is data privacy, right? Good. Let's go back to the organization, to the corporation, corporate world, and it is a common movement we see now. Companies moving more and more workloads to the cloud, right? Either to cloud providers or to software as a service providers. And now the reality is that organizations have data spread across multiple environments. They have data on premises that they manage in one way. They have data in a cloud provider that manage a different way, and they have the data with a SaaS, external SaaS provider, which again, in a different way. So what would be your recommendation for organizations that now face this kind of complex environment in terms of data management and how to keep tight controls over that data landscape to avoid these kind of leaks?
Well, I think the first thing is just literally knowing what you have. I mean, inventory is one of the biggest problems that we've always had. And that could be everything from inventory of IT assets through to inventory of data. But I bet you go into, even into a small business these days and go, okay, what are all the places you've got data? Gee, if I have to think about that myself now, that's actually a very confusing question. It's like, well, I use O365, so there's some stuff there, and then I'm doing a lot of stuff on Airtable for projects at the moment, so there's some stuff there, and then I've got some Azure things, and there's some more stuff there. And it isn't it really interesting, even as individuals, to think like, where are your assets now? Where are your digital assets? And they are all over the place. Now, 10 years ago. Go back even further, 20 years ago, it was very, very different. It's like you knew where things were. It's like, it's on my computer, and that was kind of the end of it. Yep. But I think that one of the big difficulties now, particularly as we sort of popularize this idea of having hybrid cloud models where we're going to have some stuff outside and some stuff inside and some in private cloud and some in public, all of that's great, but it's very, very difficult to know what you've got where. And what I find really fascinating is the number of times that I have disclosed a breach to an organization or worked with an organization after a breach, and they're like, we didn't even know that was there. Australian Red Cross Blood Service, that was one of their partners who literally took a backup of their production database and put it in a non-production environment on a web server facing the world. Red Cross would have no idea that their data was there in the first place. So I think the inventory piece of it is probably the first big puzzle to solve.
That's good. That is good. That's really good. And speaking of inventory of data, actually, that brings me to my next question here, right? Which is, a good data catalog is part of data governance, right? And the business mantra says that you can only improve what you can measure. So just paraphrasing what you just mentioned, you can only apply the right level of security if you know exactly what you're securing, right?
Yeah, so, pretty much. You got to know it's there, right?
Yeah.
I guess the only reason I hesitate on it a little bit is if you sort of think back up the stack, right? Like, how does the data get there in the first place? Well, very often we have things like shadow IT where people just pop up and they'll go, hey, I can go and use this cloud very, very cheaply. Let's just go and chuck all the stuff there. And they do it, because Bob in marketing, Bob's always got these bloody great ideas about using these external things. So how do we educate the Bobs of the world? And how do we give the Bobs of the world alternatives which are provided through the formal IT construct and doesn't cause him to try and go out and try and solve the solution himself or solve the problem himself?
That's right. That's right. And data governance here, right? So when you start talking about data cataloging and having your inventory of data assets, the data governance plays a big role in understanding exactly what you have and apply the right levels of security that you have on your data assets. How do you see the challenge with the people aspect? You mentioned people being the weakest link here. It's always someone who makes a mistake, and that's the weakest link, right? So how do you see that improving from now on?
Well, I think a lot of it is education. And in fact, we can probably break this down into two very logical categories. A lot of it is education, insofar as we get developers who write shoddy code, we get administrators who have shoddy configurations, just simply because they don't know how to use the tools. But I guess the other part of looking at it is, are we creating an environment where people fall into the pit of success by using these tools, or are we enabling them to easily make bad decisions? I mean, things like the number of publicly facing Amazon S3 buckets that were being breached some years ago, that's improved a lot because they've got better tooling now. Now, this was inevitably people just like literally using the cloud to do precisely what it was designed to do. but screwing it up along the way. And clearly Amazon invested in making sure that it was harder for people to make these mistakes. So I think it's got to be a little bit of both. We need people that can use the tooling right, but we need the tooling to help drag them into that pit of success again.
That's good. That's awesome. We have some questions coming from the audience. Is it okay if we could throw some of these questions here?
Yeah. I've just been reading them actually.
There you go. So there was the first one here. It says, we often find family and friends are not willing to put up with the pain of using password managers or different passwords for services or two-factor authentication. So what's to say about that? How do we convince them that? Definitely
divorce and new friends. It's like you got to cut these people loose. They will only drag you down. So I think what's kind of interesting here, and I know what Craig is saying here because I've seen this firsthand myself, but this bit about the pain of using a password manager. One of the things that you'll find with a password manager, and as full disclosure, I'm on 1Password's board of advisors, so it doesn't matter if I say good things or bad things, I'll still be on the board, probably still be on the board. But, that's my affinity. I've been using that product for the last decade. But what I find with a product like 1Password is that it's not actually pain once you're over that threshold. And it's one of these rare cases where something that improves your security actually also improves your usability. And what I mean by that is it's so easy to say log on somewhere with my iPhone, where it's just like, hey, there's a login form, and then you pop the thing open and then you Face ID and it's like, hey, there's a password in 1Password. Would you like to fill it in? Yes. And even if it was a crappy little password that I could type in, the pain of doing that on a device compared to just like autofill after Face ID, it's beautiful, but we got to get people over that hump to get there. So I'm sympathetic to Craig because I have done this with my parents and teaching my parents how to do stuff like that is, I see where he's coming from. But look, at the end of the day, the conclusion I reached with my parents, and I think many other people will, with friends or relatives for themselves as well, is that some people are going to be willing to invest the effort to do this. Now, whether it's password managers or things like 2FA, if you can get them to do it, fantastic. If you can't, give them a book, like literally a notebook. So my dad's on board with 1Password, no problems. My mum uses a notebook. Now, have a think about this, right? Like if you have a notebook and you write your passwords in there. Right now, some people are losing their mind because they're like, never write your password down. But compare the different positions. So let's say it's 90% plus. Anecdotally, it's 90% plus of people use 1, 2, or 3 passwords all over the place, and they're crappy. And they get breached in one place and they break into all the other things. All right. Now, if it was mum and she's got the notebook and she has a unique password for everything and it's written in the book because she understands books and pens and things, she's fine with that, and it's written in there, and she gets breached in one location, this doesn't get someone into her other things. So what's the remaining threat? Well, the threat is someone gets her book. They have to break into the house to get her book. Now, if they break into the house, they're probably going to want other things, and they're going to take the freaking TV. Oh, they'll just take the whole computer. They'll just walk out with the. Actually, they've got an iPad now, so they'll walk out with an iPad. They won't be able to do anything with because it will be locked and it won't. So I think that's a good middle ground. Like fall back to something which is mechanical that they'll understand, but still massively moves the bar in the right direction. And you might find over time you can swing them around to the idea of a password manager.
That's good. That's good. There is indeed that initial phase of kind of changing all your passwords to be kind of automatically generated through a password management tool, and then get over the hump as you described.
Yeah.
But it is indeed one of the best ways to prevent your password from the leaked password from being used in other services, right? That's
and
good.
it's the other thing there as well is perhaps take a step back and look at something like 1Password. It's not just about passwords, right? It's not just about you and your passwords. So my credit cards and things are in there. Like how many times you got to look your credit card number up, right? Like my credit card's going there. My driver's license details going there. I use 1Password for families. So my kids have their own vault and my partner has her own vault. And then we have some vaults that we share together. So when she says to me, hey, what's the password for Woolies? I want to go order the shopping online. Like everyone's probably done this before where you're like, oh, crap, how do I give her do I SMS it? But if I SMS it, it's not encrypted. And then it's going to sit there in the message history. Do I email it? Well, that's bad. That's why we have a vault. So you put it in the shared vault, and you can literally copy or move from one vault to the other vault, and then they get it there. So there's all of these other upsides that actually really fundamentally improve even just your usability and not just your security.
That's good. That's good. I think it's all a matter of actually getting into the habit of using it. I think the benefits will from there.
See, Craig gets it. I was just saying Craig's kind of here. I've got sick of SMSing the missus my Netflix password. I know. Yeah, but so what you do, Craig, and sometimes I still do this. It's like what I'm going to do is I'm going to send the password by like WhatsApp because it's end-to-end encrypted, and it's a really long, crazy password. But I won't send the email address I've used, and I won't send the name of the service. And then if anyone gets into my messages, they'll just be like, what's all this crap in Troy's message history? And if it's a password, where do I actually use it? Yeah, thinking.
That's right. That's right. Another question here, moving away from password management. So Troy, what do you think of future developments with blockchain and similar algorithms that we may be able to kind of secure our internet relationships? What do you think
I thought the blockchain was meant to have fixed everything by now, and I want to know why it's not fixed. Because I saw all the hype all these years ago about how it was going to fix everything. I do feel, and this is, I guess, just become a bit of an industry joke at times, where blockchain and AI have been touted as the panacea for everything. And clearly that has not been the case. And there are some things that it does well and a whole bunch of other things that people tried to make it do, which it just doesn't. Look, I mean, I think that the idea of immutable public ledgers are super, super cool in many, many ways. I'm yet to see a case where it's actually done something useful and impactful for security. Now, maybe this is just an invention someone hasn't come up with yet, but for all of the hype that I've seen around it, I remember a couple of years ago when I used to be able to travel, I was at InfoSec EU in London, and there was all these vendor stands. There was literally a stand called Next Gen Blockchain. They were selling like Next Gen blockchain. I got no idea what it does. All I know is most people still just MD5 hash my password and put it in a database somewhere.
We're already talking about the next gen blockchain, right? But look, interesting question on that topic of blockchain. Do you think the problem with blockchain in terms of not being the potential realized is due to the technology itself or due to regulation?
I see. I don't think it's that the potential hasn't been realized. I just think it was overhyped to begin with. It's like, when there's like expectation and reality. I mean, and the reality is really, really cool as it is. For those of you that have used a cryptocurrency before, there are many wonderful, wonderful things about it. So what it does in that fashion is great, and clearly it's about more than just cryptocurrencies as well. But I just think that the bar and the expectation got set so high. And I can imagine that if I was still working back at Pfizer, my pointy-haired manager would have come to me one day and asked if we could have solved some of the problems we were having producing pharmaceuticals with blockchain. Could we have made that Viagra faster if we used blockchain? So I don't know, mate. I got no idea. So I wonder how often we get questions about could blockchain be the fix from people that have possibly overhyped it, or certainly eaten into the hype.
Got it. Another one here for you. So what tips do you have for enterprises that want to manage data breach well? Assume that's inevitable. And what processes or principles would you recommend they follow? I think we talked a little bit about that.
I saw that earlier, so I loaded the blog post, and then I just dropped the link to this blog post into the chat here. So I wrote a blog post in 2017 now. Wow, this is more than 4 years ago. Data Breach Disclosure 101, How to Succeed After You've Failed. And this was in the wake of the Australian Red Cross Blood Service breach that I mentioned earlier on. So I find what very often goes wrong with the way organizations handle data breaches is the communication. And I mean, I've loaded 500. I think I'm loading data breach 531 into Have I Been Pwned right now. So I've done this a few times, and very often I have spoken to these organizations, and very often I've known people within the organizations and sort of seen how these incidents are handled. And what tends to go wrong most of the time is lawyers. There's no faster way to screw up data breach notification than lawyers. If anyone was looking at the Ubiquity incident that happened earlier this year, and then the Brian Krebs piece that came out about a month ago, it was really, really poorly handled by Ubiquity, which is a company whose products I love, but has just done an atrocious job. And it was lawyers. It's like literally lawyers saying, we can say this, we can't say that. Basically, just shut up and don't share any information, and it will go away. And this was literally part of the strategy. Like, can we just make it go away? And that really, really worries me when I see that, because what happens then, and if folks read this blog post, I talk a lot about things like transparency. The transparency goes away. They don't want transparency because transparency could be damaging to the organizational brand. So anyway, have a read through the blog post. The transparency is part of it. I find, the reputation damage is something organizations are concerned about. Things like I've referenced the CEO of the Red Cross Blood Service here, going out and doing press releases. I think it was like 3 days after I disclosed it to them. And she's on TV going, we're really sorry. Like, how many times do you see normally what happens is you get a data breach notification and it says, hi, we're just writing to you. We want to let you know that we take the security of your data seriously. And you read that and you're like, oh, no, you didn't. It's going to go wrong. And at no point do they sort of go through and say, hey, sorry, we screwed up. And I don't know. It's like we teach our kids this, right? It's like, hey, you do something wrong, you say you're sorry. This is like the first step to getting over it. That's just a big thing with me.
Exactly. So that's a good point, actually. So you mentioned the book, right? So can you tell us more about what's in the book? What have you been thinking about and keeps you up at night, kind of putting some ideas together? So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, and just look at Craig's comments here. What keeps me up at night? For me, I guess it's, and he's just clarifying here, an apology, an explanation of what happened to, anyway, that was the other thing. I'm not sure if that was meant in the term of what worries me in this industry, or if it was a more personal thing about, what's continuously on my brain. So I'll answer it both ways. I'm just always doing loads of stuff, and I keep saying yes to everything, and then wondering why I did. I don't mean for this. That's but in general, it'll be stuff like, I got a 3D printer. I didn't really need a 3D printer, but it just seemed like a cool idea. And now a bunch of my time goes with 3D printing stuff. I'm doing all this IoT, and I've got IoT devices all over the house, which for the most part are useless, except for the one I tweeted this afternoon, which is it's a little bot which will leave it to literally turn on my air conditioning. Because as we were doing this meeting, I got too hot because Gold Coast. And I just went into Home Assistant, I pressed the button, and the little lever came down and it turned the aircon on, which is kind of cool. I think to answer it the other way in terms of what keeps me up at night, what do I worry about in this industry? I just, things aren't getting better. Things are getting worse. And I think things are getting worse for many, many different reasons. Certainly GDPR and regulatory changes haven't fixed this, but they're getting worse because we have a lot more systems. We have a lot more people. We have a lot of very cheap, easily accessible cloud, which makes it very cheap and easy to screw stuff up. And it's wonderful in all sorts of ways as well, but it does make it faster to shoot yourself in the foot. And then, of course, we've got so many more devices that are connected to things and so many more interoperability. The attack surface and the amount of code that we write that can go wrong has just amplified massively. So from the perspective of, I guess, fearing for the ability for the industry to secure itself, that worries me a lot. On the other hand, it's a good time to work in security. So if anyone's looking for a career shift, if you're not already in the InfoSec side of things, there's massive demand and it's massively under-resourced as well.
That is right. There is a lot of demand for security, and a lot of conversation happening in that space. That is awesome. Right, Shiva, do you want to talk about anything that you have on your agenda?
I do, because I think we've got a couple more burning questions here in the chat for you, Troy, along the lines of finding a job in security. Do you have any tips or advice for students who've just finished uni? How do they get into this field of work?
All right, I'm going to find another blog post. I've got a blog post on everything here, and it's for moments like these. So this one is actually about 4 years old as well. Careers in security, ethical hacking, and advice on where to get started. There you go, perfect answer. So there's a blog post in the chat. Look, in short, I think what's wonderful about this industry and about technology in general is that there is so much that you can learn and do yourself of your own free volition and in your own time. So things like Obviously, I've got a lot of Pluralsight courses out there. That's great. There's a lot of open source projects you can get involved in. There's a lot of forums. There's Stack Overflow, ask questions, answer questions. There are events like this. And even in a sort of a COVID era, I don't feel that we've actually really lost much ability to do all of this. If anything, there's probably more options because there's more of the world accessible because everything's online. So I would suggest getting out there, metaphorically getting out there and doing as much as possible. And I think that very often the path just sort of becomes clearer as you get more involved.
We have a very, very interesting question here as well, Troy, on companies whose business model is about collecting as much data as possible from their user base, right? Advertisement companies, Facebook, social media, Twitter, right? So all of those collect as much data as possible so they can sell that. So what's your view of these kind of data collection hungry companies?
I was going to say something about a Microsoft competitor in a disparaging way, but I won't. There are many use cases for large volumes of data collection. I mean, let's take the Facebook situation, right? What's my view of someone like Facebook? Because they are probably one of the biggest data collectors that then monetizes that information for other purposes. I like Facebook. This is going to upset some people now. I like Facebook. I like using it. I like watching my friends in other parts of the world. I like getting my news through there. I am selective about the information I share. I recognize that they have a business model which relies on being able to target information to people. I not only choose how much I share, but I do other things like I run a pie hole in my home. In fact, I'm going to drop another link in the chat here. For folks listening out there, if you don't have a Pi hole already, Pi hole is super awesome because the little DNS resolver that runs on a Raspberry Pi, usually runs on a Raspberry Pi, you drop it in your network, you get your network gear to resolve DNS through there, and then the Pi hole can say resolve through Cloudflare's 1.1.1.1, and it just kills all requests for DNS entries that are recognized as things like trackers, which is fantastic. So when I go and I browse around the web, and I'm reading different pages in different places, all of those little Facebook trackers are getting blocked, whether I'm on my PC or my iPhone, or even if it's my washing machine browsing the web. My washing machine's connected. I don't know if it browses much, but if it does any DNS resolution and it goes through the Pi hole, those DNS requests to known trackers will just get binned. So I guess the summary there is that I think that a lot of these services offer a lot of value to us, and it's probably a little bit disingenuous to just look at them and think that they're evil and unnecessary. And there are ways that you can use them and mitigate your risk to privacy at the same time.
There you go. So that's good. That's a good point. That's a well put it in a way of how the ad business for the organization work. So well done. That's a really one. Another one here. So Troy, I know that you're writing a book. So what made you decide to write one, and what can we expect from the book?
Because Rob Connery told me it was a good idea. So some people probably know Rob. So Rob is a very noteworthy guy who certainly has been very aligned to Microsoft. He works at Microsoft again now. And he reached out a few years ago and said, you got some really good blog posts, but I think that there are more stories behind them. Like, why don't we just take a bunch of the most noteworthy ones, and then you can talk about why you wrote it, and then some of the other things that happen, and just sort of share more than what you did before and make it a bit more candid. And it seemed like a good idea, but it was just a time in my life which was becoming very tumultuous, both professionally and personally. And a lot of that I talk about in the book as well. So I only picked it up again earlier this year, and now we're at the point where I think it's approaching 40 blog posts that are going in there, and then lots of other content around it. And if anyone wants to keep track of that, you can go to book.troyhunt.com and sign up, and you'll get told as we sort of go through this process. We're going to feed it out in a beta, so I hope we're getting early or close to a V0 point something of the beta. And then it'll all be self-published. Rob's done this a heap of times before, and he's done really good books too. So things like his Imposter's Handbook for people learning about computer science is just absolutely fantastic. So we're hoping that people jump on that when it comes out.
That's good. That's good. I definitely will. Question here from Evan. SaaS, software as a service, to simplify consumption of tech in enterprise. So what do you see is the role of app marketplaces, the app stores, in the security and vetting of these solutions? Walled gardens, open platforms can be more. What else can be done to adopt more secure solutions?
Well, I think the whole idea of having, let's say, for example, the Windows Store, or if you're living in an iOS world, the Apple Store is enormously valuable. And if I think about my son, so he's 11, and the other day he said, I want to get this app. It makes animated wallpapers, and then your wallpaper, it's just got like, he knows how to push my buttons. He's like, there's one that has green text that looks like it's out of the Matrix and it looks like hacking, and it animates. I'm like, oh, this sounds really cool. And some of his friends at school have it now. Unfortunately, his friends at school have parents who've got no idea what they're doing with computers. So I see all of these kids at school where they've got admin rights over machines, for example. And I see parents who haven't got the first idea about how to secure, or the first idea about how to use basic family controls that are built into both the Windows things and the Mac things. So anyway, I go to him, all right, well, show me what the app is. And he goes to the Windows Store. And like, okay, sweet. As soon as I see it's there in that store, I know Microsoft has vetted this. We know that it's being downloaded from a known source. It's not going to be some shady, dodgy brothers thing that, God knows what's in it. And that gives me a huge amount of confidence. And frankly, whether it's my son or whether it is individuals within an organization, taking things from a store as opposed to random downloads does make a big difference. And then, of course, as a channel of deployment as well, it makes a big difference. I think as Evan starts to get into things like walled gardens, it gets a little bit murkier. There are many organizations that have what would reasonably be called a walled garden. We used to call them intranets. Like this would just be content targeted for internal uses. So I just think that's a little bit of a tangential discussion there. But yeah, certainly the idea of marketplaces is a very positive idea when they're curated and managed well.
That's good. That's good. I think that's a great idea as well. I have kids as well. I'm in the same boat as you are, with kids coming up and saying, Daddy, I want this app. I say, okay, let me have a look at what it is first.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Final question here from Evan. Follow up from on data breaches in enterprises. So do you think that organizations can prepare or practice for a data breach? And is that a good investment? Do you think kind of teams should be ready for that and have an incident response team?
Well, they practice for disaster recovery, right? I mean, this is, geez, I remember at Pfizer be like, okay, so it's the, the 1st of May or whatever date it was we did each year. It's like, okay, one of the sites is going to go down and we're going to roll over to the other site and we're going to make sure that everything still works when this happens, and you drill that. And doing that for data breaches is very, very important. And when you think about the things that need to happen after a data breach, you kind of realize why that's necessary. So, I mean, a good example is how ready are organizations if they have to suddenly email every single one of their customers? It could be millions, Can you turn around on a dime and send 5 million emails, for example? For many organizations, it's very difficult. What steps would you follow? What steps would you follow if Troy Hunt tweets asking for a security contact at your organization? So these are not hard things to drill. Maybe this is what I should do in my spare time, like create some kind of run sheet for this is how you should be doing your data breach disclosure drills. But yes, that would be really valuable if we had more organizations practicing that so that they could do a better job when it eventually happens.
I like the analogy that you made with disaster recovery.
That's the same sort of thing, right? So like we all hope it doesn't happen, but we have to prepare for it.
For some organizations, can be a good reason for invoking the disaster in the situation, right? For data-focused companies, that is a situation of disaster, right? Right. Awesome. So, guys, asking for the audience here, any final questions to Troy before you wrap up? You can come off mute and ask the question directly if you want. No one? Come on. Right. So if no more questions, I believe, Sarah, you're going to share the link to the survey and feedback. I think it's in the chat window now. Please access the links and provide feedback so we can keep improving our Reactor sessions. Shiva, I believe you have some links to share with the audience about our security skills bootcamp coming up soon. Is that right?
That's correct. Next week, Microsoft Australia is hosting a 1-week free security compliance training for anyone who wants to upskill on security. We've got best-in-class curriculum from global and local Microsoft experts, as well as tailored localized content from cyber training specialists. And if you want to find out more, here is the link. I'm dropping in the chat. It's aka.ms/security skills bootcamp.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, Shiva. And the recording of this call will be available on our YouTube channel. I think the link is on the chat window as well, as Sarah just shared with you. So I'd like to say thank you very much, Troy, for your time and joining us today. It was a good chat, good and fun chat actually, to talk about data security today. Thank you very much, man.
Thanks very much, Fabio, and thanks for everyone else for joining too.
All right, guys.
Thank
Everyone, you have a great night. Thank
See
you
you,
very
folks.
much. See you
Good
next time.
night.